Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Engineers Ireland. My name is Roy O'Connor. I chair the Roads and Transportation Society, and today we are delighted to introduce David Clements. He's a land use planner with the National Transport Authority. He's here to deliver our penultimate presentation of the 21-22 season. And the title of today's presentation is the Greater Dublin Area Transportation Strategy 22 to 42 for the next 20 years. So quite an important piece of strategic planning for the future of the Greater Dublin area. Before I get into introducing David, just to go through a quick bit of housekeeping for those of you who may not be familiar with our routine. If you have any technical issues and so forth, please use the chat function. And Sinead is in the background there, and she'll do her best to address any technical issues. And then as we go through the presentation, please feel free to enter any questions you may have in the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. And then we'll go through those at the end of the presentation, which will be around 35-40 minutes or so. So without further ado, I'll introduce David, a former colleague of mine, so delighted to have him along today. David, as I said, is a land use planner. He has a master's degree in regional and urban planning from UCD and a background in studying geography and sociology as an undergraduate in Trinity. Over 15 years experience in transport planning and land use planning, and involved in a variety of projects, most recently the Limerick Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy, and has been the project manager for delivery of this GDA Transport Strategy as well. So well placed to take any question you may have on what is a substantial piece of work. So David, you're welcome along. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to hand the screen over to yourself and you can take the floor.
Okay, thanks very much, Roy. Good to be here. Thanks for the introduction as well. I'll skip over that first page then, because really that's you've covered that pretty well already. Just the other thing to add in is like the NTA's role as a prescribed body for transport for the planning process, particularly in the Greater Dublin area, is another key part of what we do. So the integration of transport and land use planning is really my most important role here. So I'm going to talk to you about the strategy itself, and I think just before that, like I just want to say, like a lot of you will have probably read it already and are familiar with a lot of the content. Some of you are probably working on many of the projects in it. So I'll try not to dwell too much on the details of it. And sort of maybe we can talk a bit more about the issues that are, inherent within it and what challenges we're going to face over the next, 5-10 years, with a mind on the 2030 climate action plan targets, etc. And in the long term, how we actually implement this strategy and get it through, and all the challenges to go with that. So just to give you a bit of context, since the current transport strategy, now we're still in the draft phase of the 2022 one, but in 2016 we had our first transport strategy approved by the minister. So that set the development for the 20-year period back then. And major things have been advanced since then. So Lewis Cross City was completed in that period. The Phoenix Park Tunnel rail link was reopened to passenger services. Bus Connects Dublin, we commenced that, the first phase, and the first phases actually now, there's 2 phases now operational, and the core bus corridors are already being submitted to Clongriffin. One was submitted a couple of weeks ago. We have a preferred route for Metrolink, and we intend to lodge that this year now. And major increases have been delivered in cycling infrastructure, and a very ambitious program now, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, has been developed and is starting to roll out. And we have a large investment in bus fleet with low emission vehicles and transitioning towards a fully zero emissions bus fleet. So like we're required to update the strategy every 6 years under the DTA Act, the Dublin Transport Authority Act. So we commenced that the review at the end of 2019, the end of 2020, throughout 2021. At the pre-draft, we received 4,000 submissions, and there was an overwhelming support for the question of, do you think the strategy should seek to reduce the reliance on the private car? 90% of people agreed with that statement, or said yes to that question, I should say, which is, it's a lot. It seems obvious to many of us who've been working in this area for a long time, but 10 years ago, that would not have been as high as that. I think there is a cultural shift underway. So we undertook a number of studies and analyses, and we developed a draft updated strategy to take us up to 2042, taking account of climate change and testing around scenarios to do it, the impact of COVID, working from home, etc., and changes to retail. So the strategy has a number of as an overall aim and a number of objectives. So the aim is pretty much as you'd expect, sustainable, accessible, and effective system which meets our climate change requirements and serves the needs of urban and rural communities and supports economic growth. We may have, final strategy may have slightly reworded that. I think, supports the economy rather than just this kind of obsession with economic growth. Maybe there's a different kind of a shift happening there, but I think we've maybe changed a few of these things. The 4 objectives were developed underneath that aim. So on there, so the first one is an enhanced natural and built environment. You can read them again, like they're exactly as you'd expect them to say: connected communities and better quality of life, better active travel and public transport, a strong sustainable economy. So support economic activity by improving the opportunity for people to travel for work or business. And a very important aspect is an inclusive transport system. So a high quality, equitable and accessible transport system which caters for the needs of all members of society. So there's a whole range of ways in which people can be discriminated on in transport, and we aim to address those. And some of that stuff is more detail at the design of the fleet and design of stops, etc. But the strategy itself gives the higher level overarching policy basis for that. So what's in the strategy? These are the chapters. So the first strategy is the fundamental one, which is the land use planning and where the demand for travel is created. The chapter on integration and all the modes, as you expect: walking, cycling, public transport and roads. Then traffic management, freight, and then a separate section on climate action management to highlight it's not just the importance of, but also what the requirements we're going to have to address, what we're going to have to actually do as a transport kind of sector and profession particularly over the next 8 years to meet that 2030 target. So in terms of planning, the management of transport demand where it's created is a critical element. It's the critical element. It defines everything we have to do. The pattern of where people live, work, attend school or college and socialize is the key determinant in a type of system that's required. So the strategy includes the measures we think are essential to meet those objectives. So they'd include stuff like consolidation and development, transit-oriented development, mixed-use development, filter permeability, school planning and design. School planning and design is really fundamental. I think, it's even more. And we're still seeing schools being planned and located in the wrong place. We're still seeing designs for schools that, if you look at them on Google Maps, they look more like an airport than a school, with the amount of car parking and circulation space, completely car dominant. These are new schools being developed right now, and I think we have to really continue to sort of highlight these. We've written a few submissions on planning applications. Planning applications aren't the right place to tackle this, so we are trying to tackle this at a higher level, but it's still a major issue and a major generator of unnecessary car trips in the network. And that feeds into other issues like health and obesity and the sedentary lifestyle that kids are being subjected to. Kids are growing up thinking they see the world through the windscreen of an SUV rather than walking along the street with their mates. So apart from that one, the other issues for consideration for planning, I kind of want to kind of present this as not just a list of what's in the strategy, but like what do we need to consider, like in this sector, like what is the potential in this country for the radical change that we require. We are seeing higher densities, we are seeing more consolidation, but we're also seeing pushes for zonings in inappropriate places. We are still seeing those kind of developments happening, and we're still seeing sprawl, we're still seeing road-based and car-based sprawl. We're seeing the maximum car parking permitted being applied for rather than a genuine attempt to kind of bring it back again. So how much is the sector able to actually bring about that change to see if a less car dependent future can be created. The emerging policies and principles like avoid, shift, improve, again the whole land use kind of integration between transport and land use is about avoiding. It's about reducing the need to travel. It's about where you do need to travel, that it's a shorter distance, and it's by other modes. So that's the whole sort of the fundamental aspect of what we're talking about. And decide and provide is another one. This and it's still like I'm still at meetings all the time where predict and provide is the mantra from whether it's engineers or planners or whatever it is. What we're looking at sort of upgrading junctions to provide for cycling and walking where there isn't any. Do that. Decide that you want that rather than sitting there and going, well, there might be a tailback of 25 cars instead of 22. The RFC might go beyond 100%, so or over the acceptable thresholds. Let's decide the sort of urban environments we want to create and do them. and plan for car reduction. The 50-minute city, look, I mean, you know, if I go back to the previous page, consolidation, transit development, mixed-use development, filter permeability, location of services, that is the 50-minute city. We've been talking about a 15-minute city for many years. Someone's put a tag on a label on it now, and it helps to have that label there. But I mean, it is the way we look at that is kind of, that's an amalgamation or a branding of all the kind of disparate concepts that are in the previous slide into one kind of catch-all phrase. And it is the guiding principle as well. And I, you know, moving away from the GDA, I'm dealing with the Limerick strategy at the moment. It's on public display. People asking about the 15-minute city for Limerick, and I'm like, it is a 15-minute city. You can cycle from Anacotty to the city centre in 15 minutes. You can cycle from Newell to the city centre in 15 minutes. You know, just provide the facilities to do it. Other issues, the planning system's capabilities. I mean, this goes back to things like, you know, policy, not just policy, but the legislation and the way it's working and the interaction with local communities. Every single development, no matter how good or how bad, has the same number of objections. You know, I'm sick of seeing headlines in newspapers and on, you know, things like the Journal where planning is granted despite local opposition, you know, as if the local opposition in itself is worthy of stopping something. It's not a referendum. And if it was, none of us would have houses to live in today. And the drawbridge mentality is really out there alive and well. Someone moves into an estate 5 years ago, another estate is applied for permission next to them, and they all get together and object to it. You know, there's a blindness to what people out there do, and I'm not sure if the system is, are we sure the system is able to cope with all that and the delays and everything else? The SHD process was great in providing planning permissions. It did very little in terms of providing housing. And they're tweaking it again, and there's a major review of planning underway at the moment, and we're inputting into that, and you'll wait and see. But you know, previous tweaks to the system or even revolutionary changes to the system have failed to really deliver what the type of communities want. And there are exceptions, but I think they are exceptions rather than the rule to that. So we'll see how that goes over the next couple of years. And then, of course, one of the most important things is the legacy development patterns of serving existing demand. This is going to be with us forever. You know, the vast majority of the demand we're going to have to serve in the future is demand that's there today. It's demand that's in low density suburbs. It's a demand which is filled with cul-de-sacs and walls and stuff like that. So there's quite a legacy to deal with. And it's great that we have new development areas like Adamstown and Pallistown and transit-oriented development and City Edge and everything else happening. But we're still going to have the mass of suburban Dublin to deal with. And added on top of that, you have the mass of development on the edge of all the towns across the GDA. And some of these places where you have 90% car use for all trips. And that's a huge legacy to try and develop, or to try and serve and address. And it is quite difficult. I won't spend too long on the integration and inclusion. This is where we talk about all the different elements of the transport system, interchange, the fare structure, mobility as a service, things like that. You know, we talk about inclusivity and equality in this section, walking and cycling at night, taxis, everything around that. So, you know, there's a lot of the technology, a lot of the innovation is in this area as well, around information and stuff like that. And I think the NTA, you know, has been kind of to the forefront and bringing that stuff in. We look at what's going on in other countries, and you know, try and keep ourselves up to date. And like, there are changes in the fares and changes in ticketing happening, you know, almost constantly. The other major element of the integration is the park and ride plan as well. So they're all in there, as well as behavioural change. That's just an outline of the park and ride map there. So you can see a kind of a ring of park and rides on the national road network. The core principle, and it's something that's very, very, it's not always that well understood. The core principle of park and ride is to intercept car traffic at a point before it comes into the congestion, at a point where it also meets the transit, the high capacity transport network. So you have rail-based park and ride, whether it's at DART stations, but then we are planning bespoke bus-based park and rides locations around the region as well. You can see in red in that map. So, you know, the park and ride office has been set up, and they're working through all this. And you know, we anticipate stuff happening quickly enough on that side as well. In terms of cycling for personal mobility, you know, we updated the cycle network plan, and we've amended on the basis of the feedback. There was a different approach taken to the cycle network plan mapping this time, but we've gone back to the way it was before. The cycle infrastructure design is in there. The cycle manual has been updated. You'll have seen, some of you will have drawn them. The bus connects, kind of emerging designs there, the protected junctions and stuff like that. That's all going to be implemented or incorporated to that. Bike share scheme expansion, electrification, interoperability. That's very important. And of course, we have to be conscious now of e-bikes, electric scooters, and stuff like that have emerged. So that's just a snippet of the cycle network plan as published with the draft. As I said, that's been slightly amended to include more of the routes on the feeder routes and stuff like that. The main issues, I think, look, this is a huge area, and the pandemic has really, helped to kind of highlight the benefits of cycling, if you like, but we need to capture that and make sure the momentum that we've had over the last couple of years isn't lost. And, I am worried that it will be lost, but I think we'll see as things emerge and as normality, a sense of what the new normal is, sort of embeds down in the next few months. But like the issues here, like deliverability, this is a huge challenge. We've got all the money from the department now, 350 million a year to spend on cycling and walking. And the planning process, again, I go back to what I said earlier on the housing side of things, it's the exact same for cycling. You've all seen it. Is the planning process fit for delivering cycling infrastructure? You've seen court cases, you've seen huge, what was it? I don't know how many thousands submitted on a scheme in Lucan to remove 10 parking spaces. You have traders up in arms with a case in Clements where someone was saying they're going to have to close down, and they ended up expanding after the cycle lane went in. These are temporary cycle lanes, not even the permanent ones. So there is kind of the value of participation, I think, is an issue we have to think about. Getting 1,000 submissions. I think there was a scheme that someone worked on in one of the Dublin authorities where the first time around the Part 8 got something like 6 submissions. I think it might have lapsed, or a slight change was made to it, so they went in for another Part 8 and they got 600. So what's the value of that? I mean, are we getting to a point where, like, on our side of things, like, there are campaigns out there are groups out there, and again, like I said, it's not a referendum. If it was a referendum, it wouldn't be a single, motorway or Lewis line in the city. So what are the issues there? How do we address these issues? How do we ensure that we can do these things without being delayed or obstructed, or the whole thing being a us versus them or a conflict? I think it's a really, we're talking here about cycle lanes. We're not talking about 6-lane motorways through the center of the Liberties like we were 80 or 30 or 40 years ago. So it's really a very significant issue. The other thing let's bring up is things like the focus on the key demands versus deliverable schemes. Often, the most effective cycle schemes tend to be the ones that are most difficult to deliver. They're the ones where the demand is highest, where you're into places where the road network is constrained, where, there's other demands on the network. And it's very tempting to say, you know what, we'll just build that greenway in rural County Meath instead, where no one's really bothered that much, and we'll just do that, and we'll tick the box to say 20 kilometers delivered in 2022. So, we need to kind of be conscious of that at least, and be wary of it, that we need to kind of get to the ones that are hard to deliver, and that's linked to the first point, how difficult it has proven to be over the last number of years. And of course, resources are a major issue. Resources for ourselves and the NTA in terms of project oversight and everything else, resources in the local authorities and in consultancy, and the capabilities as well. We had a comment in Limerick about, why don't the NTA just give us more autonomy? We have our own designers, we have our own local authority engineers. And the quick answer is some of the designs just aren't good enough. And we have to make sure that the designs coming back are right. They're in line with the manual, or in line with the emerging manual, the best practice guidance. We're still seeing designs coming back with like really unsatisfactory junction designs and stuff like that, that belong in the 1990s. So there is and that is critical. I am criticizing, but we're seeing it in planning applications as well, when the cycle provision and stuff like that is just incomplete and not good enough. So the NTA, we have to have oversight. We have to have that kind of approach. But on the other side, we have to see development applications coming in, or our own schemes that we're funding coming back without having to see major surgery on them. And the other issue is then, what will e-bikes deliver in terms of expanding the market, and where will this expansion come from? There's a lot said about like e-bikes and increased cycling and emissions and everything else, but like if these trips are coming from buses or even from walking, what's the benefit? So how do we get people to go from car to e-bikes and stuff? And like, it does expand the market for cycling, and it will kind of make them kind of people will cycle longer distances, but where it'll come from, and you have to be aware of that as well. So hopefully there will be a significant chunk coming from car as things ramp up into the man-mounted side as well. In terms of public transport, look, a lot of you know these stuff already, the core bus corridor program, the radial core bus corridors, adding to that, Orbital's new Dublin bus service network, the monitoring review of that network, other things like regional core bus corridors on the national roads coming into the city, new bus stops and shelters are all included in there, as well as Connecting Ireland local link, and the zero emissions bus fleet. And the maps there, it's the core bus corridors already. We have Clongriffin lodged, and others are coming in, Ringsend, and others are coming in soon. These are the orbital routes in the network, and these are the regional routes coming in. And the bottom graph there is just the transition towards zero emissions bus fleet. What are the issues to consider in bus? Well, the CBCs are now planning again delivery. Delivery is a major issue, obviously. You can probably tell from the start of this presentation. Significant opposition is anticipated. Like, we are expecting absolute, not quite war, but close enough to like real opposition. We've already seen it through every phase. We've seen it in the strategy consultation as well. All those local issues, few of them, you can see how they've come back in again to attack the strategy as well. And it'll attack Metrolink on the basis of Bus Connects as well. The network review implementation, there's challenges there, because if we're going to be perfectly honest, there are going to be winners and losers in that network review. We've seen issues in Lucan, we've seen issues in Sandymouth, and we've seen issues in, where else did we introduce it? No, the first spine, I think, went fairly well, and the H spine, because that was more the simple one. But there are going to be issues where those changes that have been opposed every step along the way, because they are genuinely a loss of service in some areas. Once we implement it, the reality of it will kind of hit then. The emerging development areas are a challenge for public transport as well, and bus. There's a lot of new development areas in the city being planned, and we have to ensure that the network, the whole point of the Bus Connects network was that it was adaptable and flexible. And it means that if new development areas that aren't served directly by spines, they will be served by high frequency local or orbital service. Places like Fassaro, for an example, even Clonburris will be very, like, the bus network in Clonburris will be fairly orbitally based, while the rail provides the radial. And then providing for Bus Connects in the planning system, like all the planning applications coming in, we have to make sure that there's, first of all, they account for and you guys would have been, a lot of you would have been involved in discussions maybe with myself and others in the NTA on how we provide for Bus Connects, the bus lanes, but also bus stops and bus layover and things like that have to be provided for as well, because we are ramping up the network. I think Bus Connects network itself was a 27 or 25% increase in buses. That's only going to get higher and higher as new development areas come on stream and as we increase it further. In terms of light rail, like obviously Metrolink, we're going to look for consent this year for the 4 extensions and new lines, Finglas, Bright, Bullbeg, and Lucan. Like they were proposed previously, obviously, so there's a bit of angst around their delivery. In addition, now we've seen a further 8 Lewis extension, new Lewis lines for construction post 2042, and they're basically the upgrading of the core bus corridors in the long term. Now, if demand for those comes forward, we'll look at bringing them in earlier, but at the moment, even taking into account a kind of business as usual demand scenario, we're on the cusp by 2042 as to whether these should be light rail or bus. But with the kind of what's the word for suppressed demand as a result of COVID and working from home, they're certainly going to be beyond 2042 where the demand arises. But obviously the strategy is reviewed every 6 years. Policies change every couple of years. We'll look at them again in the next strategy. So the main issues to consider there, again, delivery, Metrolink, considerable opposition to Metrolink. There's considerable opposition to Metrolink in Dublin South West, where they want their own metro, and they believe that the Metrolink we're proposing will compromise that. It doesn't. There's also just opposition on the basis of the impact it will have. I was just going to point there out the window at Charlemont, which is just over there. But that's going to be a difficult oral hearing and everything else, as expected. I think always are. The cost is obviously going to be something to consider. It is a mega project that we've never done before, and the scale of it is huge as well. So I think I'm right in saying it's certainly the most expensive project the state will have ever done, but it's probably the biggest project. I mean, like if you compare it to like the Port Tunnel, it's not even in the same ballpark as the Port Tunnel. It's many multiples the scale of the Port Tunnel. And any of the motorway schemes we've delivered to date, and any of the tunnels, it's much, much bigger. And I don't think, I've saying it a few times, I don't think people will, the general public will really get a feel for it until they see the holes in the ground with the hoarding around it, like the scale of what you require to even the opposition or the proposal for the Dublin Southwest, Metro Southwest group. I don't think they understand the size of the holes in the ground that have to be dug out across that corridor to deliver the stations, for example. I just don't think it's really in people's minds. They think it's underground and therefore there's no impact. The impact is huge, absolutely massive, and it'll be a major advantage for the city. It's going to be a massive benefit, and I think that will be proven eventually when it's opened, and it'll be proven throughout the oral hearing and everything else that this is a necessary and essential scheme. There are no real alternatives on that corridor, and particularly the airport and Swords growing. The timelines for the 4 existing proposals, they're the ones Lucan, Finglas, Poolbeg and Bray. You know, it's been said like, Lewis Finglas, you can see there on the left, it's only 4 stops. You still have to go through the EIAR process, still have to go through, you know, emerging preferred route and preferred route. You still have to go through a lot of consultation and CPO and everything else. Just because it's a short extension doesn't mean the process can be shrunk in it. It's not a proportional thing. There's a legal requirement to do an EIAR and a railway order. But I think because these schemes have been around for such a long time, understandably, you know, there is an issue around their deliverability, and if they can be sped up, they will. Now, there is an NDP overarching all this National Development Plan, giving us the kind of the funding envelope for the next number of years. And then there's a long-term transition to Lewis on the select corridors, as I mentioned earlier on, and how that will be managed if the demand arises, when the demand arises. DART and heavy rail, the whole DART Plus program obviously in there. You know, DART hasn't been massively developed since 1984. You know, we brought it to Malahide and Greystones. There was a significant capacity upgrade. I think it was around in late 90s, early 90s. But this is a step change now, bringing it out to western suburbs, and then in the strategy, further extensions to Kilcocknex and Wicklow. The Navan rail line is in there, a lot of new stations. DART Plus tunnel, we want to preserve and collect an alignment to allow future deliveries subsequent to the strategy period, and additional security measures. So that's kind of the going up to 2042 network, DART Plus and Lewis and Metro, what we're proposing there. And then we add in the post 2042 Lewis lines on top of that. There's also an orbital Lewis proposed, and you know, we haven't put it in as an alignment yet because it's really, we're leaving that open as much as possible. That will depend on land use plans and city edge and how they develop, or if there's, you know, further growth out here. We have done Sink as a major development area inside the M50 as well. So, you know, we are maybe when the next round of land use plans comes out, the next recess, we have a bit more clarity on the numbers of people living in these areas. On our next strategy, might be able to identify one or more orbital light rail lines. But as things stand, we're not in a position to really come down too clear on it yet, but it is provided for. In terms of DART Plus, like the issues to consider here, I've written, like, this is a personal view, like a profile. It's like the profile of DART Plus. People like to see things like this, new lines on maps. They're not as excited about a line changing color from a diesel to an electric line, or its frequency going from every, whatever it is, 20 minutes to every 5 minutes. But it is a game changer. It was a game changer in 1984. It's going to be a game changer again the next few years for the western suburbs in particular, and beyond there, because it does allow for changes to the regional and intercity services as well. It's also an enabler of transit-oriented development of places like Clonburris and Adamstown. They've already developed, or sorry, Adamstown is nearly complete, but Clonburris, a major new development area. Woodbrook has already got the DART, but obviously DART Plus improves that service. Clongriffin as well, improvements there, will enable that to function effectively. There's a lot of very high density development still to happen in Clongriffin. Other issues are the local realities of the scheme. So, you know, it's very easy for someone like me to draw a line on the map and say, there you go, there's an electrified rail system, aren't you delighted? But there's level crossing closures. There are impacts on that. And we saw what happened with the green line when we tried to close level crossing there. And hopefully, look, it's a matter for the board, but like, we're fairly, you know, we know that we do require to close these level crossings, and they are part of the scheme, and they will be part of the scheme as we go forward. The priority for the DART Plus tunnel is another major issue, and that's because that's been regarded now for many decades as a sort of a silver bullet for the Irish, or for the Dublin rail network, in the absence of the Phoenix Park tunnel being used. So now that we've got the Phoenix Park Tunnel opened and electrified, and we'll have a service at a high frequency all the way into the city centre, not all of the objectives, but many of the objectives of Dart Plus Tunnel will be met, mainly linking people from the Western or from the Kildare line directly into the city centre. There are other benefits of Dart Plus Tunnel that won't be realised by that, and that's why it's still there. But at the analysis we did, and it was a high level analysis we did of the public transport flows, or the public transport boardings and lightings, Dart Plus Tunnel only added 10,000 to the total all day flows. So, and it was carrying 60,000 a day, but 50,000 then were coming from the Phoenix Park Tunnel and the Maynooth line and Lewis lines and everything else that we planned. So it's important. It's still very important, but it's certainly reduced in importance since we put in the Phoenix Park Tunnel. Remember, all the analysis of Dart Plus Tunnel in the past was done, all sort of cost benefit, etc., was done without the Phoenix Park Tunnel being used for passengers. So it has changed in its status, but it's still part of the strategy. I won't dwell too long on roads. The first point there, no significant increase in capacity on radial roads within the metropolitan area. That's a fundamental thing. And obviously bringing in sustainable transport, facilitate walking, cycling, and reallocate road space when you put in a bypass. Putting in a bypass or relief road, it's no longer something to increase capacity. The capacity has to be taken back to other modes, and we'll try to ensure that as well. There's a few national road schemes in there as well, not maybe what was envisaged in the past, but certainly, these will all include the regional core bus corridors as considerations as well. So, the N11 being the key one there to complete bus priority. And the biggest, I suppose it is big news, but I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Eastern bypass has been dropped. So, we're still proceeding with the Southport access route with Dublin Port, TII, and Dublin City Council. And the other major road scheme, another road scheme in the strategy is the N3, N4 link. So that's the resilience for the M50. It's the only link that's missing. But obviously that will be done, very much with environmental and stuff, open space requirements in mind. Traffic management and travel options, these are real detailed local stuff that we spend, and these take up a huge amount of resources and time, and these are really important measures at the local level. So we're doing a Dublin City Centre plan over the next few months, the management of urban centres, speed limits, low traffic neighbourhoods, all of these measures that we brought in. Safe routes to school has been pretty game changer for some schools. Parking standards, all these things that need to be considered, like in terms of traffic management options going forward. So they're all accounted for in the strategy as well. Freight is in there too. I won't dwell too much on that. The most important thing there is the bottom one, which I'll go on to later, reducing the environmental impact of the freight sector. So in terms of climate action management, spend a bit of time here. A 51% reduction is required relative to 2018 by 2030. That's hugely ambitious and very challenging. So the top and bottom of the whole thing is we need to increase the proportion of travel by sustainable modes and reduce the level of petrol and diesel powered vehicles. So we have a strategy here for 2042. We've modeled and tested up to 2030. We will need to do more. We'll need some other policies to come in from national government to meet that 51% reduction. And that will include parking restraints, zonal charging, tolling, road pricing, and further vehicle electrification. But when you go to 2042, obviously we'll have reduced it by significantly more than 50%. So just the issues along here, we've done a lot of work on the GDA strategy. There's a lot of issues around that 50%. It's been applied to each region or the LS metropolitan areas. Each strategy has to demonstrate this in some way. And it's the long distance travel by internal combustion engine vehicles. That is the far most important element that requires addressing. People living in Dublin and in the city centre, they're already walking and cycling more, they're getting buses, so they're like, I have an electric car and I don't drive that much. So, me changing to an electric car will have a negligible impact, even at the local level on emissions. But, when you talk about rural areas where people are driving, maybe they're commuting to work 50 kilometers in each direction, not only is the cost to them personally absolutely, massive nowadays, but, they're emitting a lot of carbon and other pollutants as well. So that's the main thing. So that's what really needs to be tackled. The rollout of electric cars, it's a very ambitious program. We've, assessed this strategy and other strategies on the basis of that being expedited further. But as people say, are we really doing the right thing by changing everyone to electric cars very quickly if they're not going to change their car anyway? I think rollout of electric cars, we focus on, those who are going to change the car anyway should certainly look at an electric car. What potential we have for public transport to be delivered by 2030 and then to deliver emissions reductions. Like I said, I mean, we have to transfer the long distance trips away from petrol and diesel. So how much can we actually transfer of those trips to public transport? HGV technology development. The HGV sector is the one where we don't have a clear major kind of target or the assumption we use in the strategy and modeling and everything else. We don't have a kind of a similar target that we have for electric cars. So, and the sector itself is struggling. And I've seen a couple of times now in the last month or so, this idea of putting in, overhead catenary on motorway networks. The first time I saw it, I thought it looked crazy, but it's not, like, so we'll have to look at some of the stuff like that to really, like, that's the key thing in all the strategy assessments we've done. It's getting the goods vehicles transferred over to electric or zero emissions is going to be the step that needs to be taken to get to that 2030 thing. The political will, look, you've seen what happened with the turf burning. What is the political will there to really do these any draconian measures around car use? There's social justice, climate justice aspects of this as well. If if there's a feeling that we're punishing the less well off and reducing their ability to travel, are we, particularly if you look at rural areas and rural isolation, we're struggling to provide a viable, we're not going to provide a high frequency public transport system, but are we then causing further isolation by some of the measures we do, particularly something like road user pricing on it? I'm not saying we don't do it or I'm against. I'm just saying these are the things we have to be aware of. And the last issue is, electric cars aren't the answer to everything. Emissions will reduce, but urban design, allocation of space, promotion of alternative modes, mass transit, economic development requires mass transit. Car dependency is car dependency regardless of the fuel. It's not enough to just say, we're grand, we've reached our emissions target with electric cars, move on. And in a way, like, because of electric cars rolling out, we've kind of lost the ability to use climate change as an imperative for some of the public transport and everything else that we want to put in, because that argument is now there. People say, well, everyone's got electric cars, job done. It's not. If we want to live in a city, the type of city we think we want to live in, electric car parked on Marion Square is still a car parked on Marion Square. Just in terms of the outcomes of the strategy, I won't dwell too much on this, but yeah, the 69% reduction in CO2 emissions, this is by 2042, just to be clear, 63% increase in numbers used in public transport. The car mode share drops by 9%. Now remember, we're talking about the entire GDA here. We're talking about the rural areas where there isn't the same ability for car to be reduced. So that's across the GDA. I think in the metropolitan area, it drops to around 40% all day trips at all times, not just peak hour. Other notable ones would be the 14% mode share for cycling in metropolitan Dublin. Now, these aren't targets, these are model outputs. It'd be great if that was 20%. So let's push for that. In terms of the timeline, I mean, there was a lot, like the early parts of the strategy, there was a lot of this came up. And, look, realistically, by 2030, we hope to get the Bus Connects network in, Bus Connects core bus corridors in, Dart Plus, upgrade to the Green Line, a massive chunk of the cycle network, if not all the primary network, including the Bus Connects corridors. City centre management, again, another major part of it, and all the measures we could require to meet our climate action plans targets. And then after 2030, Metrolink, the 4 Lewis lines, Navan Rail Line, Dart Extension, etc. So, Metrolink, it's about an 8 or 9 year construction program. It goes to planning this year. It's out of our hands then for possibly a number of years, if it goes to court, etc. So, but as soon as it's there, like, we'd expect the funding to be there to deliver it then. But that is, again, another question. And the public consultation is finished. We're about to present this now to the minister in possibly next week or two. We've got 1,020 submissions via the online portal, email and survey responses. The main issues raised were the ambition and delivery timelines. Metro's been around for over 20 years. Lewis, Bray, Poolbeg, Finglas been around for around 20 years. There is understandable angst there. Part of that is people seem to have forgotten that the IMF were running the country for a few years, not that long ago, and there was almost a lost decade of investment here when we went to the Minister for Transport at the time with 3 projects ready to go: Lewis Cross City, Dart Underground, and Metro North. and he chose obviously the one that was significantly the cheapest one. So we lost those two, and we haven't got them. We've developed Metro since. Things moved on, technology moves on, everything moves on, land use planning moves on. So you have to go back and start again. So there was a period there where there was a pause in that timeline. So I think that has to be acknowledged again. Public consultation and engagement. Look, I think you've all pretty experienced this in the last 2 years. People aren't as happy with the engagement being done, but we've done as much as we possibly could. We had 6 online events and stuff like that. So, and we got 1,000 submissions. The 2016 strategy got 170 submissions. So, I can't say the engagement wasn't enough. There was issues about the cycle network plan, the details, fare structure. Nav and rail line, there's a whole rewilding project going on that alignment that came up that we'd never heard of before. And then, sorry, phone ringing. Metrolink and Charlemagne Terminus, Metro to Southwest Dublin, and you can see the rest there. Some of the details around Dart Plus and the Dart Plus tunnel itself as well. A lot of issues came up on the Bus Connects network and core bus corridors. Again, scheme level issues that have been raised before being raised at the higher level. So the next steps: finalising the text, submitted to the minister. The same time we submitted to the minister, we submitted to the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly. It has to be consistent with our RESIS. We need a statement from them saying that. It goes to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Transport and Communications, and then also to the Development Applications Unit under the Birds and Natural Habitats Regulations. So the EMRA and JOC submit their observations to the minister, and the minister can approve it, approve with modifications, instruct that it be resubmitted to him, or refuse to approve it, and then we'll publish a final one. In 2016, we submitted to Minister O'Donoghue. He approved it. In 2011, we were submitted to Leo Varadkar. He sent it back to us, said it was too expensive, and then didn't approve it. So it's not outside the bounds of possibility that the minister doesn't approve this, and we end up we end up with the previous one just applying. So that's what we intend to do with the strategy. And look, delighted to talk about any of the issues that I've raised here or anything else. So that's the end of my presentation. And thanks for listening. And I'll hand you back to Roy.